been some time since the events of the Second World Warrior tournament that saw the evil dictator M.Bison, leader of the criminal cartel Shadaloo, once again try to achieve world domination, only for him to meet his end at the hands of Akuma. Following Bison's third death, the world enjoys a time of peace, believing that the threats of Shadaloo are unlikely to rear their head again. However, the world remains oblivious to the actions of the group prior to Bison's death, with him having secretly ordered the creation of 26 android replica bodies to be used in the event that he failed to defeat his enemies at the Second World Warrior tournament. Created by their weapons division, the Shadaloo Intimidation Network, SIN for short, the 15th replica body soon takes over the sub-organization due to its higher level of intelligence. Dubbing itself Seth, the android uses the power vacuum caused by Bison's death to launch SIN onto the world stage, where it can use the combined might of its forces and Shadaloo's remnants to achieve the world domination that Bison couldn't. To do so, Seth plans to organise a new fighting tournament separate from the World Warrior moniker in order to lure the strongest fighters in the world, with the goal of stealing their data and fueling the Bleast machine, a creation of SIN's that serves a mysterious purpose. However, Seth's true goal is to lure out none other than Ryu himself, the warrior who M.Bison had become obsessed with stealing the body of, with the hope of using his data to fully complete the Bleast machine. Word of another international fighting tournament soon spreads like wildfire, with many new and returning fighters gaining interest in the competition. Having spent the time since his loss to Akuma training and honing his fist while fighting off the killing intent within him, Ryu eventually hears of the competition and SIN's involvement. Feeling that something sinister is at play, Ryu decides to enter the tournament both to fuel his natural desire to fight and to end whatever threat he feels is looming. Also hoping to gain more experience as a fighter, Ryu anticipates meeting old and new opponents alike, especially his best friend Ken Masters, to whom Ryu writes a letter to asking him if he will be competing. Ken eventually receives Ryu's letter, but finds himself conflicted as the timing of the tournament clashes with the due date of his and his pregnant wife Eliza's child. Ken initially hides Ryu's letter from Eliza, but she eventually discovers the truth and gives Ken her blessing, to his surprise. Ken at first refuses to abandon his wife just before she is to give birth, but Eliza assures him that her due date is still a ways off and that Ken will have enough time to enter the tournament and fight Ryu. Satisfied, Ken eagerly writes his response to Ryu, telling him that he looks forward to having a showdown with him at the tournament. After reading Ken's letter, Ryu practices his Hadouken on a waterfall but fails to split the water. Frustrated, Ryu thinks on the words of his deceased master Goken. Having motivated himself, Ryu feels that he is ready to enter the tournament and sets off into the world to do so. Meanwhile, the US Air Force Major Guile visits the grave of his friend Charlie Nash, who has been declared dead after going missing while investigating Shadaloo many years ago. Guile, however, still believes that Charlie may be alive and argues with his superior over Charlie's body having never been recovered. Guile's commanding officer tells Guile to move on from clinging over Charlie's fate and to look forward. Despite his attempts to retire from the Air Force and look for Charlie on his own, Guile's superior sends him out on a new mission. After giving him Charlie's dog tags with the blessings of Charlie's family, Guile's superior tells him of SIN's actions in the black market and their connections to Shadaloo. Guile at first refuses to believe that Shadaloo could be involved, having been convinced of their defeat after Bison's death, but agrees to investigate the Rogue Weapons Division regardless. Vowing to make sure they'll all pay for their actions, Guile leaves a drink on his friend's grave and sets out to expose the criminal organisation entirely. Guile thinks of the many crimes Shadaloo and SIN have committed over the years, as well as the many victims they have left in their wake. Guile sets out on his motorbike to investigate the circumstances of Shadaloo's possible return, even though his quest for vengeance has caused grief for the ones close to him. Meanwhile in Hong Kong, a crime is committed outside of a restaurant as Young and Yang Lee, the nephews of the drunken Master Lee, rush outside to investigate it. They are shocked, however, to see that a retired Chun-Li has already beaten them to the crime scene. Telling them to stay where they are, Chun-Li stops the getaway car with a single Kakosho and subdues the criminals with her legendary kicks. As she goes to arrest them, Chun-Li is approached by none other than Guile, who has arrived to recruit his old partner to once again help him in his mission against SIN. Feeling that her retirement has come to an end, Chun-Li once again dons her iconic Chi Pow and teams up with Guile to take down this new threat. As Chun-Li and Guile speed away in their car, Young and Yang watch them leave with jealousy, having never had the chance to leave their home or restaurant to fight. While Yun is not surprised that Chun-Li has left to go on another adventure, Yang already guesses that Yun will most likely want to follow Chun-Li into the tournament. While eating with Yang, Yun wonders the type of fighter it takes to draw Chun-Li out of retirement. Yun, just as Yang predicted, soon suggests leaving their home and joining the upcoming competition. Soon after, the twins find themselves leaving town with their belongings packed and their skateboard and rollerblades ready to go. Although Yun assures Yang that they're just going to keep an eye on Chun-Li, he promises to not shy away from a fight if given the chance. Yang is not surprised at Yun's hot-headed decision to follow Chun-Li, but admits that he too is curious about what has convinced her to leave retirement. As they leave the city, Yang wonders about all the strong fighters out in the world and decides to use this excursion as a means to fully test his own strength. Having also watched Gal and Chun-Li depart is Gen, the former legendary assassin. Gen speaks to the memory of Do-Rai, Chun-Li's father, telling him that he has watched his daughter grow into a strong and admirable woman. However, Gen's terminal illness grows worse as he curses his frail body for failing to protect Do-Rai, with Gen having tried, and failed, to save him when he was abducted by Shadaloo years ago. Gen promises to not let Shadaloo get away with their many crimes, but he finds himself cursed by the same dream of his many victims. No longer feeling any guilt for his hand in their murders, Gen embraces death as his ultimate destiny, but vows to not let his past sins catch up with him before his time is up. Sometime later, Chun-Li and Gal go over their information on SIN, its operatives and its activities. Chun-Li is disturbed at Seth hosting a new tournament, but decides to use it as a way to gain more information on the fate of her father and the truth behind his supposed death at the hands of M.Bison. Chun-Li asks her father to watch over her so that she can assure no one else will have to share the pain she has gone through. Meanwhile in England, Cammy White, a former member of Shadaloo's doll program and a clone of M.Bison, plays with a cat when she is visited by her Delta Red commanding officer Keith Wolfman, who arrives with a new mission. Cammy is briefed on SIN's activities with both the Bleach Project and their expansions in India, and is horrified to notice the links between SIN and Shadaloo. Despite being informed of SIN's fighting tournament and how they'll no doubt be prepared for her involvement, Cammy confidently accepts the mission. Cammy says goodbye to her cat as she prepares to leave, but decides to pay one last visit to a comatose Junie, a fellow doll that Cammy helped recover from Shadaloo's grip sometime after the Second World Warrior tournament. As she watches over Junie, Cammy thinks of the callousness of both Shadaloo and SIN, as well as the timing of them announcing a new fighting tournament. Cammy then races to catch her departing ship, while vowing to flush out those involved with both SIN and Shadaloo as payback for the crimes done against her fellow dolls. As those who had previously fought against Shadaloo race to combat SIN, many of the competitors hear of the upcoming tournament and decide to enter it for their own reasons. On a rainy day in France, a young man named Abel protects a small stray dog from the rain, feeling kinship towards it after realizing that it's alone. Abel adopts the dog and leaves it with a neighbor while he sets out into the world to investigate Shadaloo. As he leaves, Abel thinks of all the things he will buy for the dog when he returns, looking forward to no longer being alone. In order to find out more information on Shadaloo, however, Abel tracks down Chun-Li, knowing her as one of the fighters who had led to its downfall. Abel asks Chun-Li if she has found more evidence on the cartel, but he instead decides to reveal his past to her when Chun-Li acts suspicious of him. Abel is an amnesiac with no recollection of his past outside of a burning laboratory. Having been taken in by a mercenary commander, Abel's only link to his past is the warnings of his now deceased mentor, who warned Abel to stay away from something called Shadaloo. Chun-Li is shocked by the mention of Shadaloo as Abel reveals that the lab he was found in likely belonged to the cartel. Chun-Li decides to give Abel her evidence on SIN and Shadaloo, informing him of the upcoming fighting tournament. Abel decides to enter the tournament with the hope of discovering the truth of his past and his links to Shadaloo. In India, the people of the great yoga master Dalsam's village come to him in horror and outrage after their water supply is diverted due to the construction of a dam. Dalsam is disturbed by the reports of the dam's guards aiming guns at the villagers and their company logo closely resembling Shadaloo's. Dalsam then thinks of his son Datta telling him about his pen pal Amy, the daughter of Guile, who had wrote to him about how Guile had recently left to go on a mission. Realizing that something evil is beginning to stir, Dalsam tells his people that he must leave them so he can return their water. As he leaves, Dalsam thinks about the logo resembling Shadaloo on the dam. Despite Shadaloo's defeat, he cannot shake the feeling that they still lurk behind the scenes. Although he still holds his pacifist beliefs, Dalsam knows that his fighting abilities can be used for good if the cause is noble. In Brazil, the former wild beastman Blanca decides to leave his home and beloved mother behind despite enjoying living with her. Resenting the people that stare and talk about him and his mother behind their backs because of his appearance, Blanca heads out into the world in order to become something that he feels won't embarrass her. Meanwhile, Dan Hibiki films an advertisement for his new dojo. Promising greatness from his Psycho style, Dan uses every promotion tactic he knows to lure people in to train under him. In his rundown dojo, Dan meets with his old friend Blanca, who informs him of the upcoming tournament. Dan despairs over himself not making it to the Second World Warrior tournament and admonishes Blanca for not informing him that the tournament was even happening. Blanca, however, claims that he did try to contact Dan about the tournament but was unable to due to Dan not paying his phone bill. Dan brushes off the embarrassing truth and claims that the two of them and their friend Sakura Kasugano will enter this new tournament and show the world how great Saikyo is. Ignoring Blanca's comment about him not even using the Saikyo style, Dan promises his deceased father that he will spread Saikyo all over the world. Soon after, Sakura herself visits Dan's dojo after being asked to. Sakura brushes off Dan's attempts to make himself her master and asks if he's found anything out about Ryu after Dan lied to Sakura about Ryu being an apprentice of his. Dan panics and informs Sakura of the upcoming tournament as a distraction, using his knowledge of Ken's participation to convince her that Ryu will also be involved as well. Sakura is ecstatic at the idea of meeting Ryu again, having not seen him in many years. Together with Dan and Blanca, Sakura races out of the dojo and heads out to compete in the tournament. With Ken's participation in the tournament now being common knowledge, the overweight fighter Rufus becomes jealous of Ken's title as the strongest fighter in America and claims to be the better fighter and better looking of the two while on a road trip with his girlfriend Candy. Candy suggests that Rufus enter the upcoming tournament so that he could beat Ken and prove to everyone that he's the best fighter in the country. Rufus loves the idea and sets out with Candy to find Ken and defeat him. As they drive aimlessly across the country, Rufus rants and raves to Candy about Ken, his weight, his fighting ability, and many other things. Ken, meanwhile, takes a rest stop in the desert and calls Eliza to check in on her and the baby. After nervously giving Eliza tips to stay safe, Ken is calmed down by his wife and bids her farewell. Ken then contemplates his upcoming role as a father and his journey from training with Ryu in his youth to now. Ken laments how his feelings on life and training have changed so much since he was younger, wondering what Ryu would say to him if he was here. Deciding that he'll have to ask Ryu in person, Ken continues his journey in search of him. While on a boat with Dan and Blanca, Sakura writes down her workout routine and schedule in her journal. As the sun sets, Sakura wonders if she's gotten any stronger since she last met Ryu. Deciding that meeting Ryu is the most important thing to her right now, Sakura tells Ryu to wait for her. Later that night, as the others sleep, Blanca thinks about how his friendship with Dan has helped him grow as a person. Hoping to win the tournament in order to gain his mother's respect, Blanca thinks of the fun he had with his mother at home and wants to make her as happy as he is, promising to be a new man when he returns. In Japan, the famous sumo wrestler Edmund Honda wonders what he can do to make the world more interested in sumo. Honda dons his infamous red face paint and battles the students that try to stop him, intending to make sumo a worldwide phenomenon. After boarding a freighter with the assumption that it would take him to America, Honda wonders where he has actually ended up, but soon decides to not worry about it and instead focus on his goal of impressing the world with his sumo skills and gaining legions of fans in the process. In Russia, Zangief climbs through the frozen mountains in order to leave his motherland behind and enter the tournament. After being ambushed by a pack of wild bears, Zangief uses his wrestling skills and patriotism as inspiration to defeat the bears, declaring that he will do whatever it takes to make his country proud. After escaping the mountains, Zangief comes across a group of children playing with action figures, with one boy playing with a figure of Zangief himself. The other children mock the boy for liking wrestlers, claiming that they're weak when compared to martial artists. As the boy tries to defend his love for wrestling, Zangief approaches the group and uses his strength to shatter a tree stump, impressing them all. Now motivated even further, Zangief promises the boy that he will use the tournament to prove that wrestling is the best. In his native land of Mexico, Thunderhawk of the Thunderfoot tribe watches his growing village from above, grateful to see them back on their native land despite not yet reaching its former greatness. After being asked to be made chief, T-Hawk feels like he cannot accept such a responsibility until he has made up for his own past failures. Having still not been able to save his beloved Julia, a former doll of M.Bison's, T-Hawk decides to leave his village in order to find Julia and save her from the effects of Shadaloo's grip, not allowing himself to become chief until he has done so. In a bar in Jamaica, the music sensation DJ picks a fight with a rowdy patron and defeats him handily. As DJ chides the patron for not being exciting enough, he finds a poster advertising the SIN tournament and decides to enter, considering the competition his kind of fun. In Hong Kong, the movie star Fei Long is told by his crew that the production of his latest film has to be put on hold due to the interventions of the film's sponsors, who are displeased with the film's villains being a criminal syndicate. After being told about the previous project only going ahead due to Shadaloo being defunct at the time, Fei Long puts the two together and realises that Shadaloo in some form must be back. Refusing to sit idly by, Fei Long vows to stop Seth and SIN, abandoning the production of the film. As Fei Long leaves, he tells the cast and crew that they won't have to worry about him for long, as he will return in time for production to resume. Sagat, the former Emperor of Muay Thai, practices his moves on a wild bear, but is left unsatisfied with his current strength. Sagat then reflects on his current journey that began following his loss to Ryu in the first World Warrior tournament. Feeling that he changed forever the moment he lost against Ryu's Shoryuken, Sagat ruminates on the revenge-focused path he walked following his defeat. Following his loss to Ryu in the second World Warrior tournament, however, Sagat has begun to see the meaning behind victory, defeat, and the fight itself. Now determined to know the ultimate purpose of the fight, Sagat follows the burning desire of his scar and heads out into the world in the hopes of finding the answers he seeks. Adon, Sagat's former pupil, stands victorious in a wrestling ring as the crowd cheers him on. Adon reflects on how it only took one fight for the master he used to respect to become a snivelling coward, considering Sagat a tiger with no fangs after his retirement from Shadaloo and focus on fighting Ryu. Adon then notices Sagat himself watching from the crowd. Adon jeers his ex-master, calling Sagat the former king. Sagat tells Adon that he's looking for something to help reignite his spirit. Sagat then climbs in the ring and faces Adon, promptly defeating him with a single uppercut. As the crowd cheers for him, Sagat looks at his defeated opponent and realises what he must do: enter the upcoming tournament. As he returns to his locker, an embarrassed Adon claims that only death awaits tigers and jaguars that have lost their fangs, wondering if Sagat has forgotten even that much. As he leaves to enter the SIN tournament, Adon vows to put Sagat out of his misery himself if he has truly folded up his claws and thrown away his pride as a Muay Thai fighter. Akuma meditates alone in a cave, having spent the time since his hijacking of the previous World Warrior tournament thinking about the growing rise of the Dark Ado within Ryu. Suddenly, a disturbance knocks Akuma out of his deep concentration as he wonders if the thing calling out to him is really what he assumes it to be. As he leaves his cave, Akuma showcases the terrifying power of his killing intent as he decides to head out into the world to meet with Ryu and finally bring out the Satsui no Hado within him. In Metro City, Cody Travers decides to once again break out of jail due to his growing boredom, though he promises the correctional officers that he will eventually return. Having thought that defeating the Mad Gear gang would have made the city and himself happy, Cody is disappointed that he finds himself rotting in a cell while everyone else happily lives their lives. Once he returns to the city, Cody realises that his old friend Guy is already watching him from the rooftops. Looking forward to their upcoming reunion, Cody anticipates his escape not being as boring as he thought it would be. Guy, meanwhile, feels the unease brewing in the world, knowing that for every hero that vanishes, another weapons dealer appears in their place. As he leaps through the city, Guy thinks about how the people's problems and struggles seem so tiny in comparison to the history of the world. Despite that, Guy feels like he cannot sit idly by and let evil prevail, and declares that he will write their history with the righteous hand of Bushinryu. In the slums of Metro City, a turf war takes place between a local gang and ex-members of the Mad Gear. The ex-Mad Gear decide to bring out the big guy, who is revealed to be Hugo Andore, a former member of the Mad Gear gang. The hulking giant faces the gang, but soon sobs after missing his mother's potatoes. Having grown an attachment to potatoes due to his mother's words inspiring him when he was a young boy, Hugo is angered when the ex-Mad Gear insultingly compare him to a potato and attacks everyone present in a rage. Afterwards, Hugo decides to abandon the ex-Mad Gear members, vowing to show them all that he is number one and prove to his mother that he is the biggest potato. Meanwhile, Poison, also a former member of the Mad Gear gang, watches a wrestling match in boredom. Poison interrupts the match to the jeers of the crowd and tells the wrestlers to not embarrass her as their manager. The wrestlers tell Poison that it's not that easy, mentioning that Sodom, another former member, has retired from wrestling and opened a yakitori restaurant. Annoyed at the two's gossiping, Poison gets in the ring and challenges the two wrestlers, eventually beating them so bad that they need stretchering out of the arena. Frustrated with her current situation, Poison notes a flyer for the upcoming tournament and decides to enter it, hoping to meet some fresh talent. Another former member of the Mad Gear gang, Rolando F. Shugurg, finally leads his own army into battle with the goal of saving the world and creating his own utopia. While giving a pep talk to his soldiers, Rolando is informed of SIN and their plans to test a soldier enhancing system at their upcoming tournament. Excited at the opportunity that has come before them, Rolando tells his army that their new target is SIN and that the soldier enhancement system will be theirs. In England, the gentleman boxer Dudley receives an invitation to the SIN tournament. Despite finding the invitation to be lacking in social grace, Dudley decides to enter the competition, wanting to use it as an excuse to train his skills and pick up some exotic flowers for his garden. Dudley tells his butler Ortho K. Gotch to send a reply to the invitation at once before taking a sip of his tea, hoping to use the upcoming tournament as a way to get his mind off of his father's missing car. In her home of Kenya, a young woman named Elena finishes practicing capoeira with her brother, who compliments her on her growing strength. However, a sudden gust of wind disturbs Elena, who is soon approached by her father, who senses the disturbance too. Having spoken with their people's shaman, Elena's father tells her that a bringer of death walks among them and is likely associated with the upcoming tournament. Elena's father enters her into the competition, hoping for her to observe the bringer of death and seek out their true intentions. While her brother is against this, Elena assures him that she'll be fine and excitedly heads out into the world. As she leaves her high school, the ninja in training Hibiki voices her annoyance to her friend Sarai about only being able to choose between a mountain and a forest for their upcoming training camp, feeling that both are boring. Later that night, Hibiki continues to be frustrated, feeling that she is going to waste her youth and chance to meet cool guys by training in the wilderness. Deciding to skip out on the training camp in order to have some fun, Hibiki calls Sarai to let her know she won't be joining her to the camp just yet and to make up an excuse for her, promising to get her a souvenir to make up for it as she excitedly sneaks out into the night. Following the passing of her father, the young fighter Makoto visits their dilapidated family dojo, where she is surprised at the poor condition it is in. Deciding that something must be done to save it quickly, Makoto decides to enter the upcoming tournament with the hope of gaining the prize money and using it to renovate the dojo back to its former glory. In Mexico, the luchador chef El Fuerte presents his signature dish to a horrified chef, claiming it is guaranteed to make the eater big and strong, despite it actually being disgusting to eat. As a means of saving himself, the chef manages to convince Fuerte to head out into the world with the promise of collecting a wide range of recipes. Fuerte is intrigued by the idea, hoping that collecting the best recipes in the world will bring him one step closer to becoming the ultimate chef. Deciding to use the SIN tournament to help fuel his goal, Fuerte excitedly leaves and begins visiting restaurants around the world where he draws the ire of many talented chefs and patrons alike. The Turkish oil wrestler Hakan scolds a crowd of onlookers for coming to his house and assaults one, mistakenly assuming them to be an industrial spy seeking the secrets of his homemade oil. Hakan tells the defeated onlooker that his supposed plans won't interfere with his dream of winning a tournament with his own brand of oil and decides to go on the offensive, planning to make an oil so good that no one will be able to copy it. In an SIN boardroom, one of their executives speaks on the phone to an agent where he commends her for her tireless work on their battlesuit program. The agent thanks the SIN leadership and confirms their choice in testing out the prototype in their upcoming tournament due to them being the only one capable of using it efficiently. The SIN executive agrees to put the agent in charge of the mysterious Bliss project should they succeed in using the battlesuit to defeat their enemies, just as they had requested, before hanging up. The agent, known as Crimson Viper, soon receives another phone call from an ally who informs her that a new fighter capable of jeopardizing her mission has entered the tournament and wishes her luck before hanging up the phone. Later that night, Sea Viper receives a report that the body of one of her allies has been discovered dead, meaning that the entire team of agents that had been pursuing Shadaloo are now wiped out. Despite this, Viper promises to still carry out her investigation before hanging up. Viper laments the lives lost at the hands of both Shadaloo and SIN and their weapons and power. Declaring that nothing lasts forever, Viper reveals her true identity as a double agent as she vows to unmask Seth and Shadaloo and expose them all for good. In Italy, the fortune teller Rose goes through her tarot cards while struggling to remember what happened following her possession by M.Bison years ago, having come to after Bison abandoned her body to organise the Second World Warrior tournament. Rose still relies on her soul power as the one weapon that Bison cannot control and promises that it will be his undoing. Rose decides that she must once again set out into the world in order to stop whatever Bison has planned, feeling that he must still be alive somewhere. As she steps off a train, Rose looks at the tarot card of the Fool, claiming that her fortune-telling labels it as the only one that can stand up to Bison. Realizing that she can only temporarily stop Bison and not destroy him due to her sharing the same power as him, Rose has to rely on the holder of the Fool Arcana, who can only act when the stars align to herald their coming. Assuming the holder of the Fool to be Ryu, Rose vows to do all she can to protect and guide him on his quest to destroy Bison, claiming that to do so will be her last mission. The results of Rose's fortune-tellings are indeed accurate, as the remnants of Shadaloo's scientists finally succeed in doing the impossible, bringing back M.Bison to the world of the living. In a hidden Shadaloo laboratory, M.Bison speaks to his subordinates from inside a recuperation tank, where he demands that they release him early. Despite the scientists' objections that he isn't ready to be freed yet, Bison overrides them and declares that it doesn't matter if his current body isn't as strong as it can be, as he still aims to claim Ryu's body as his own. The Shadaloo scientists relent under Bison's oppressive demands and begin infusing his new body with psycho power in preparation for his return. Soon after, Bison is informed of Seth's betrayal and usurpation of SIN. Despite dubbing 15 as just another gear in the machine of his ultimate ambition, Bison is still surprised that Seth has gone as far as he has. Even more, Bison is disturbed that Seth would recruit a specific agent to his arsenal, dubbing the agent a vile woman. Bison soon sets off to defeat Seth, vowing to crush the rogue number 15 under his heel as punishment for the marionette forgetting his place. Meanwhile, the vile woman that Bison speaks of finds herself bored with the assignments currently assigned to her by Seth, telling him that if he can't find something to occupy her with, she'll have to sneak off and find her own things to do. The agent, named Juri Han, tells Seth that she isn't lying about her promise to sneak off on her own, but relents when Seth finally reveals her next assignment to enter the SIN tournament. Juri is interested in the tournament but asks Seth to not add any rules, wanting nothing to hold her back. Meanwhile, SIN scientists watch over Decapre, another of M.Bison's dolls that they had recovered following Shadaloo's defeat. After using their technology to free her from Bison's mind control, Decapre has visions of her past as a doll, as well as with Cammy when the two were children. Becoming overwhelmed with a hate-induced rage towards Cammy and the world, Decapre breaks free from her tank and vows to kill Killer B and everyone responsible for her pain. Following the destruction of Shadaloo and his defeat at the hands of Chun-Li and Guile, the brutish boxer Balrog has spent his days in casinos where he lashes out at any dealer who he feels cheats him. After leaving victorious from another casino brawl, Balrog finds himself approached by a Shadaloo agent who brings a message from M.Bison announcing his return. Balrog accepts Bison's job offer on the grounds that he gets paid, telling the agent that he doesn't do anything for free. After being offered a ton of cash for the job, Balrog rides in the back of a limo as he wonders why Bison is offering so much money for simply watching over a doll. Deciding that Bison must be up to something evil again, Balrog soon discovers that he is in charge of watching over the remaining replacement bodies as they remain in incubation. Eventually, Balrog realizes that due to Bison no doubt spending a lot of time and money on the creation of the replacement bodies, he might get a major payout if he were to sell them himself. Being able to smell the money he'll make off of them, Balrog gets excited at the idea of pulling off a heist from right under Bison's nose. Vega, meanwhile, hosts another lavish party at his mansion, but soon leaves due to his disgust at the ugliness of the partygoers who only desire money and power. However, Vega soon notices an intruder and confronts them, telling them that it's rather rude to crash a party. The intruder, another agent of Shadaloo's, arrives to bring the message informing him of Bison's return, as well as Interpol and the Americans starting to interfere with their plans. Vega laughs at the news, excited to finally clash once again with the ones who had once stopped Shadaloo. Sometime later, Vega begins reconnaissance on Seth and sees him being guarded by SIN agents. Vega voices his inability to understand men like Seth who hunger for power despite their bodies already being ugly. However, Vega is still intrigued by the idea of creating new bodies to use as replacements, though he laments that not even a god could reproduce a body as beautiful as his own. Vega laughs as he voices his desire to defeat Seth and take his power for his own, hoping to use it to allow his beauty to live on forever. Sometime later in the SIN throne room, Seth calls out to a hidden Juri to face him. After revealing herself, Seth reminds Juri of her vendetta against Shadaloo after they killed her parents for trying to take down the cartel. After Seth asks her if she is done with her foolish games, a cocky Juri retorts back that she's almost through with them. An annoyed Seth tells Juri that she has overestimated herself if she has plans to take care of both Bison and himself. After Seth accuses her of possibly intending to kill him here and now, Juri denies it and tells Seth that she'll likely have more fun working for him than against him. Seth, not believing Juri, tells her to do as she pleases as he leaves, hoping that he will live up to her expectations. After meeting with Juri, Seth looks at his reports on Juri and her secret ability called the Feng Shui Engine, a creation of SINs that replaces the eye Juri lost during the murder of her family at Shadaloo's hands. Aware that Juri could very well betray him at any moment, Seth plans on keeping his manipulation of Juri going in order to achieve his grand goal. Planning on using humanity's own hands to strengthen him, Seth vows to remove the restrictions of artificial morality while he will then hunt Juri and put her down before she can strike him first. Seth soon receives a report from one of his subordinates about the tournament and how the latest fighter to qualify is Dan Hibiki, who only just managed to get in. Seth tells the agent to speak when he struggles to finish his report, but soon becomes horrified when he hears that one of the tournament's competitors might be M.Bison himself. After demanding that this information cannot leave the room, Seth leaves to take a shower where he ruminates over Bison's possible return from death. Deciding that something must be done before Shadaloo rises again, Seth vows to prove to the world that M.Bison is merely a ghost and that soon they will know what true power really is.
We await your return, warrior.